Let me start this by just with a short prayer. Lord, I want to give you thanks for this day. Thank you for this people, this church. Blessing has been to me. I pray that all that we say and do today is honorable in your sight. We pray again for your presence in Christ's name. Amen. Well, they wanted me to talk about my faith journey, and I'll give you the punchline on it right now. Thank the Lord for the Lord, because it's His guidance and that has brought me to today. And the kids always tell me, Dad, you need to get more detail into what you're saying. And I tell them, if I'm going to get all the detail into the last 82 years, we're going to be here a long time. But so I'm going to abbreviate it, and I try to get through to the points that I'd like to share with you. And to begin with, I just wanted you all to have a map of basically Russia and Ukraine and then Germany. And the two stars there are on the lower right-hand corner in Odessa is where the German settlements were. And that's where my parents were. And then the upper star by Hamburg is the journey that we took in 1941 that my mom took and her parents. I was conceived in Odessa and I was born in Germany. It's a 1,500-mile journey roughly, and I wanted for you to have this, and also the background of how the German people got into the Odessa. The Tsarina was in charge, Katerina II, she was in charge of Soviet Union. She was of German descent, and she came into authority in 1763 until 1804. In 1804, Alexander took over, and she inherited a bunch of territory during the Turkish Wars, and part of it was the Ukraine. Well, during her career as the Tsarina, she found that there was this fertile country or this fertile area in the Ukraine, primarily in the Odessa region. She was of German descent, and it was just not producing produce the way it should. So she made some decrees and also gave you a copy of those as an inducement for German people to migrate to the Odessa. And that's where, for those people that are in the immigration history, both in Buehler or Hillsborough, in the Dakotas, Nebraska, Winnipeg, Canada, they all came from they were German people that had settled in Odessa when Katerina made the decrees and gave these special considerations to the German immigrants. In Europe during that time, it was in a fair amount of turmoil with the wars between England and Spain, and so there was a lot of turmoil, and there was religious turmoil for the persecution that a lot of the religious people got, the difference post-Reformation, which happened a couple 100 years before that, 200 years before that. So there was all this conflict in Europe, and it was overpopulated, and so she made these decrees as an inducement for people to wind up in the Ukraine. So I thought with all that's going on over there now, you'd be interested in seeing what that map looks like, and that the Germans that immigrated into the Ukraine because of the conditions and the decrees that Katerina gave in the early or mid 17 and late 1700s. So my parents, my mother was Lutheran. It wasn't just Mennonites. She was Lutheran. My father was Mennonite, and they got married in January of 1941. Mom was about 2 to 3 months pregnant with me when in April, my father, who was 25 at the time, and he was in charge of the milk producing entity in the area, And he got a alternative from the Communist Party. The revolution happened during World War I in 17 through 19 in that era, and the communists, beginning with Lenin and then Stalin, started in that time frame. Well, the tensions between the Russian serfs that were there and the German people was there to some degree, but it really accelerated with the communist revolution in the late 1910s. If you want to go into more detail on that, Aya knows a lot more about this probably than I do, and you can get some resources that go into that. But that's how my parents got to where they were. Mom Lutheran, Dad was Mennonite, and they got married in January of 41. As I said, in April, my father got the ultimatum to either join the Communist Party or deal with the consequences of not becoming a communist. And he said he would not become a communist, but he did not leave, and a lot of men left knowing that this was not going to be friendly for them. And so he got a notice to meet in the town square in May of 1941, and so he went to that meeting. Well, that meeting resulted in them putting on a train and shipped presumably to a labor camp in Siberia, and we never heard from him again. So you can imagine what this was like for my mother. Here she is, 2 to 3 months pregnant, and husband is gone. And my grandfather, who had made a negative comment about communism, was sent to a labor camp and had a serious infection in his right hand and arm. Probably should have died from it in those days, but it resulted in him being crippled, and so he was no threat to the Russians, and they left him alone and they did not ship him off on that train along with my father. So we never heard from him again, and my grandfather at that time, Mom's dad, had decided there's no future for us in Russia anymore. And so they embarked on that trip from the Ukraine in the Molochna area to Germany, and I was born in a town in northern Germany called Gronau. And that was in 1941. Like I said, my kids always want me to say, Dad, you need to say more detail. Well, if I go into all the detail that happened in the last 82 years, we're going to be here a while. But I'll try to give you some of the details that resulted in my trek and my becoming a Christian and my relationship with Christ and His work in my life for the 50-some years that I was in medicine. When we got to Germany, they actually, after I was born, they moved around to various areas and were in the eastern part of Germany. And so I'll relay a couple of instances that happened. And then during that time, towards the end of the war, I was probably 3.5 years old. The war ended in 1945, and I turned 4 in November of 1945. But during that time, my family had, my mother and her parents had moved around quite a bit in Germany. And I would mention a couple of, Mom would ask me if I remembered any of what was happening then. And I said, well, and I relayed a couple of things. And so she rarely talked about that time because, as you can imagine, the war resulted in total destruction in her life. She turned 21 on February 29th. She was a leap year baby. And so here she was, 21 years old, pregnant, and going to have a baby, and her husband's gone, never going to see him again. Well, while they were in Germany, they were actually in the eastern part, and we were in a storm shelter. I just remember the one thing I will mention, and Mom filled in the rest of the details. We were in a storm shelter, and a Russian soldier came into the storm shelter and motioned to my mom to go with him. And she said she can't go. She's got a baby in the back. So she went back, brought me out, and he said, okay, then you go. You come with me. It was her sister. Well, as they were walking out the storm shelter and got to the base of the stairs, there was a German soldier shot the Russian, and he was immediately killed, but there was a lot of blood on the floor. And I remember walking past that, and past that dead Russian soldier, and my mom filled in all the details for me. But after that time, and she said it was the correct story, but it became apparent to my grandfather, her father, that our tenure in the eastern side of Germany would be highly suspect, with the Russians coming from the east. The Americans were coming from the south, and so they decided they needed to get out of the eastern part and get into western Germany and get to where the American allies would wind up. So they decided they needed to get across this river to get out of the territory they were in. And I relayed this to my mom. I remembered going across that bridge, and all that was left on that bridge was about 2 feet, and we made our way across that to the other side. Well, we weren't on the other side, my mom told me, but a few minutes, not very long, and the whole bridge was blown up, and there was no further crossing into the west side of Germany. So we wound up on the west side, and obviously in what turned into, but that's how we wound up being in West Germany rather than East Germany, and then subsequently our immigration to the United States. My mom remarried in 48. There was a generally accepted principle that if your spouse did not surface within 7 years of their disappearance, you are free to remarry. So she married John Hubert. John had 2 girls and a boy. The boy was in the middle. He was my age, 3 months older than I was. He had a number of illnesses that his mom was pregnant with his younger sister, died during childbirth. So Hank had suffered from malnutrition. And so he had illnesses that in his orthopedic system, he had what's called premature cranial synostosis, which means the plates in the brain, in the skull, fused too early and didn't allow the brain to grow. And so it put a lot of pressure on the inside of the head, and he resulted in having very prominent eyes, lost his vision. But he was my ward, and I took care of him wherever we went, and he obviously became my best friend. But at any rate, that happened then in 1948, and my new family, John and Lena, decided that they wanted to immigrate. They did not want to go to South America. They wanted to go either to the United States or Canada. And they found out early in 1951 that they were cleared to go to the United States. So we were put in some government housing to observe us for 3 to 6 months, make sure didn't have tuberculosis or other communicable or impairment that would void the likelihood that we'd be accepted. So we were there, and in October of 1951, we got word that we were cleared to come to the United States. So we left Germany, Bremerhaven, and sailed past the Statue of Liberty on November 2nd, 1951, which was my 10th birthday. And got to New York, went through Ellis Island and the whole immigration process, and then had a farmer, a stock farmer from Illinois, pay our train fare from New York to Illinois, and a commitment to work for him until that was paid off. Well, something I didn't mention that happened in Germany. Mom worked for various entities before she got married, and we had contact with MCC. And she got to know the executive director of MCC, who was Peter Dick. She knew him casually, but at any rate, she knew who he was, and he was responsible for the relief efforts in Germany. So just remember his name. When we got to Illinois, we were there from early November until the summer, because my stepfather, had finished paying off the train fares that took us from New York to Illinois. And during the time we were in Illinois, they put us into school, and I knew 2 words, yes and no, and that was about it. And they said, how determined my age was 10, so 4th grade, that's where you belong. So I was in 4th grade there, knew no English, and developed a significant inferiority complex, as different as we were. Our foods were different, our clothes were different, and I remember very early, probably at the end of the day in health class, talking about how bad germs were. And I knew that Germany lost the war, and there was some conflict there. But I said, germs were so bad. And I thought, well, I'm not that bad. But it didn't help my inferiority feelings during that time in 4th grade. Well, at the end of the 4th year, by the end of the 4th year, you're a kid at that age. The language is not that big of an impairment. So I learned English, developed some friends, even went to stay over with one of my friends for a weekend and lived in his house. And so got pretty much acclimated in the 4th grade. Well, at the end of the school year, the teacher indicated that she thought I had done really well, but she really wanted me to do 4th grade over again. Broke my heart. But during that time, Mom received a periodical called Der Bote, and in that was a notation that Peter Dick had taken a church near Moundridge, Kansas, Eden Mennonite Church, west of Moundridge. So my mom, since Dad had worked off the train fare, decided she would contact the Eden Church and see if there would be an opportunity for my stepfather, to have employment in the Moundridge area. And the Eden Church just really embraced us. And they helped us with getting to the Moundridge area. We moved in a farmhouse about 3.5 miles west of Moundridge. Incidentally, both of those first 2 houses, the one in Illinois that the farmer provided for us, he had a 10,000-acre tract of land, had no utilities except for electricity, no water, outside toilets, and the house that we moved into, Moundridge, had the same utilities and only electricity, a furnace in the basement. There was a coal-burning furnace. At any rate, the church was just incredible in adopting us, and got my father a job working for the railroad, and so we moved to Kansas in the summer of 1952. Well, about 3 miles west of us, or 1.5 miles west of us, and a little south, on the old K61 highway, was the school that we were going to. And this happened in the summer, and so when we got to the school, now I'm going to have your help on this. I got to the school, and they asked me, where do you belong? Okay. Pardon? What did you say? 5th grade, absolutely. Do we all agree? Because I lived with that unconfessed sin for a long time. But I didn't make it through 5th grade, and ironically, I was actually at the older age range, and in 7th grade, the tests they gave us and whatever, they said, well, actually, you can go on to 9th grade if you want to. So I felt validated. that fifth was appropriate. So at any rate, grew up then moved to Mount Ridge for 6th and 7th grade to Elyria for my 8th grade. Well, during the summers in Mount Ridge, between 6th and 7th and 7th and 8th grade, my mom thought nothing good would happen for me growing up in the big city. So they shipped me off to the farm. Herb and Louise Stuckey, just an amazing couple, had no children, but they adopted me. I went there for those 2 summers, and subsequently for the school year. I went to school there. I have to really watch what I say, because Flick, we grew up together at Elyria. He was in 6th grade, and I was in 8th grade. We didn't have enough boys. Flick was always on the team, whether we played softball or basketball, whatever we did. You remember those years, Flick? Good years, yep. Anchor point years. But then for 9th grade, I went to McPherson High School, and went to McPherson College with the intention of becoming a doctor. My dad's twin sister, who had immigrated to Canada, was an anesthesiologist, and she was an encourager and such a supporter during my growing up years, as were the Stuckeys. They were just incredible people. And Louise was so positive and helped me with a lot of my insecurities and inferiorities, and it was a real blessing to me. I went to high school in McPherson, went to college with the intention of going to medical school. I don't know how this is coming, but I've got a ways to go yet. But at any rate, I went to Mac College, and in 1963 applied to go to medical school. My grandkids, I did something with them at Christmas last year. A friend of mine got a present from his kids that they could ask him questions, and then it was all computerized, and they would print it up for him, the answers and whatever. Well, one of the questions of one of my grandkids was there ever a door, Grandpa, closed to you that in retrospect turned out to be really kind of an important thing, and God guided you where He wanted you? Well, there's no better example than my application to medical school. In '63, I applied to medical school in the fall, beginning of my senior year, and at Mac College. And typically, you either in those days, you got asked for an interview, or were accepted, or told, no, you're not a candidate by the end of the year. Well, I never heard anything from them. In February, finally, they said that I was not processed because my application was incomplete. So I got a hold of the KU people, asked them what was the problem, because I graduated, decent grades, I made honors at Mac College. Said it required 6 hours of foreign language. I said, well, I can talk German pretty good. So at any rate, that process led, my chemistry prof got me a position at Iowa State for that fall. He said, it won't hurt you to go for a year and work on a PhD, get your degree up there, then go to medical school. So I went to Iowa State, but with the idea that I would do a PhD in chemistry. After the second year, it was just not working. I knew I wanted to do medicine, so I relayed this to my advising professor, and he said, well, yeah, right, I'll let you write a master's, which then you can apply to medical school. So he said, oh, they have a program that you can, if you can demonstrate proficiency, that you can test out of classes, and I think you could qualify to test out of the German. So I went into this professor, and he asked me about my story, and he was in charge of the language department, and he tossed me a German newspaper and said, read that article in the third column. And so I started reading out something. I still remember it was something like, wir haben 100.000 Menschen verloren in North Africa, because da ist ein Krieg da. And he said, it's good. Took the newspaper and told me, you've got your 6 hours of German. So I said, well, great. So I went down and talked to the dean of the medical school, Cameron, and he said, well, yeah, I think you'd be good to go. We'd take you, but the class is full. We'll make you 12th alternate if you want to be put on the list. Chances aren't we never go past number 6. I said, well, okay, put me on the list. I told my chemistry advisor, prof, that I tentatively was looking pretty good at KU, but I'm 12th on the alternate list, and I don't think I'm going to make it. He said, hey, I've got a flyer from a school in Kansas that is looking for somebody to teach chemistry. And I said, oh, okay. He said, let me get that. And he found it and said, Washburn University wanted somebody to teach chemistry. I said, okay. Well, I applied, I called them, and they said, yeah, come on down and we'll talk to you. They talked to me and they said, yeah, okay, I could start medical school. I mean, I could start teaching the chemistry at Washburn. Paid me in those days what I thought was a lot of money to teach chemistry at Washburn. So I moved to Topeka, and with the intention of teaching in 1966 at Washburn. When I got there, I thought, I need to start this correctly. So I went to the Yellow Pages on Sunday morning, and I looked at churches and Mennonite, and I took the first one and called, and no answer. I called the second one and said, yes, in fact, I'm the pastor with services at like 11 o'clock or whatever it was. So I went to the church, Fairlawn Avenue Mennonite Church. Who was the pastor? Who? Roland Reimer. So met Roland and Lois. There was a kid, tall kid, lived 2 houses down for me on Boswell, where I was living to teach at Washburn. I said, I think I know that guy. And it turned out, who was it? He was 6'5", red-headed. Dale Jost. So I went down and talked to him one time, and he said, yeah, I go to Fairlawn MB. In fact, I'm going to get married, and my fiancée is Shirley Dick. I said, well, I don't know who you are, but it's Shirley Jost, as we know her. And they were due to get married, and Shirley had a roommate who was Joyce had. So Shirley told Joyce, why don't you meet this guy? I think he's okay. And she said, what does he do? Well, he's going to teach at Washburn, teach chemistry. Nah, no way. But finally, she agreed to go out after a choir practice. And so in October of 66, we went out, and I said, I'm done. This is the woman for me. And I mean, she was pretty, smart, solid Christian girl. I was through hunting. So we wound up dating, and in the following year, in 1967, in July, I said, you know what, will you marry me? And she said, it was July 4th weekend, and she said she would. So in August, 5 weeks later, we got married, and her parents were having a farm sale plus building a house, but somehow we snuck it in there, and so we got married in August of 1967, and or 66 rather, and I was accepted to medical school to start then in 1967 when we got married. It's just a good demonstration of God slammed that medical school application door shut back in 1963, only to open it in 1967 with a detour through Topeka and through Iowa State, and Joyce and the rest of our family then to follow. Well, got finished with the wedding, set up shop in Topeka, went to medical school at KU in the fall of '67. '71, we decided we'd come to Wichita for the internship and postgraduate training, and so I wound up at St. Francis Hospital. You know, I see more and more familiarities. I think, Kenny, you were there, weren't you? That's a yes. You know, the cat. Yeah, he was a tech in the cath lab. But we started the internship, and during the year, I had decided I'm going to do an internal medicine residency and then a fellowship in either in neurology or cardiology or GI. I wasn't sure which. Well, a complicating feature happened during that time. Jan Flickinger, well, she was Reiswig at that point, said, "Hey, I'm working with 3 doctors, John Sand-Kradatsky and Ed Wiepert in Wichita. Why don't you think about going there?" I said, "Nah, I don't think so." Well, Mom had told me the year before at Christmas that she had a lump in her breast. I said, "Well, you get it checked out, Mom. It just could be something serious." Well, the next Christmas, she said, "I still have that lump." He said it was okay, but it's getting bigger. Well, she wound up then mentioning that in the Christmas of 1970, and I was due to finish my training in 71 in May of '72. Turned out to be malignant, and she died a couple of years later at age 55 due to the metastatic breast disease. So, but she, having that diagnosis during the time that I was doing the training I thought, you know, it probably wouldn't be an idea to stick around for a while. Maybe I'll go work with the Kradatsky doctors and look after Mom. Well, it turned out to be a lot more serious than I ever thought. And she died 2.5 years after that, after she turned 55. But I started then doing that, and after 3 years, 2 to 3 years after Mom died, I was enjoying it a lot. I did my board exams in family medicine and wound up being a fellow in it, and so family practice was the right place for me. It was clear, and I was there then with those guys for the next 50 years. In about 1978, the boys' dad, E.E. Kradatsky, was a senior pastor at Central Community Church. And he had a vision. They had some role in Terrace Gardens of doing some senior housing, and so embarked on the project of the Maple Gardens Senior Housing Project with a restaurant, our office. Well, we determined that we better have a medical office there. If we're going to have seniors there, that would be a good selling point. So I volunteered to move out there, and I went out to Maple and Mays Road, which ran into real financial problems during the late '70s and the early '80s when we moved out there in '81. And if you'll remember, those were the Jimmy Carter years, and our personal debts had an interest rate of like 22%. So John, there were just the 4 of us. Stan was leaving to do Healthcare Plus because he got real excited about the new healthcare program. So Stan was leaving. We were going to look at some additional recruits, so we got Dave Roble to join the group. We were back to 4, and we opened the Maple Gardens office in '81. And then moved to the current location in '85. But in the interim, I became moderator of First MB, Ridgepoint, and served in that capacity for 25 years or somewhere in that range from 1976 on. And then at the same time, Larry Martins was on the seminary board, and he proposed I get on that board, so I was on the seminary board, was on the First MB board, also on Mission USA. Also in '83, I was president of a medical staff at St. Francis. So I had 3 or 4 years on the executive committee as vice president and the immediate past president, and so also was on the St. Francis board for a long time. But the seminary board was particularly impactful, because not only did I get to meet with the pastors that we had regularly, which included Dale Workington, who was here in Wichita, and obviously Brent, his son, took over. In between, we had Nichols, if you remember them, and John Workington, always really quality people, and that I got to know, particularly on the seminary board. And I learned so much from the Lionel Alfords, like on the hospital board, who told me, do not ever chase the technology ghost. Do not chase it. The only exception is golf. You can do it in golf, but not in anything else. Get what you need, but don't go off on some tangent. But at any rate, because of all of that information, when Maple Gardens ran into trouble, John said, look, I'm going to have to bow out of doing any of the administrative stuff in the office. It's going to be yours. You got to do it. I've got to spend over there, or we're all going to go bankrupt, and we'll all be in bad shape. So I said, well, okay, I'll give it a run. So in the 1980-81 time frame, I took over the responsibilities for the group. Well, the seminary board was particularly impactful because we had some people come in that talked about board development and the overall development of the organization, the importance of mission and vision statement, and a strategy of what you would do. So I said, okay, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it right. We're going to get our mission and our vision, and we're going to get them in order, and we're going to get our primary strategy in order. And I had always had this habit of, if I ran into conflict trying to decide where to do my postgraduate training or whatever, I would start Matthew 5 and read as far along as I would get until I got some peace about where I was. And of course, it goes through chapter 7, which is the Sermon on the Mount. And it's just an incredible passage. Well, within that, there also is in verse 12 in chapter 7, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So piecing that all together, coming up with a mission and a vision statement, I decided, okay, our methodology is going to be caring for other people the way we want to be cared for. Because in some other translation, it literally uses that terminology. Well, how appropriate is that for medicine? To care for, when you're responsible for caring for people the way you want to be cared for. So that became our model. And the golden rule, in medicine, there was always the gold standard of a particular test that was the defining entity in that particular organ system or illness. For example, in cardiac disease, you could do EKGs, you could do sonograms, blood work, all of those, but the gold standard for definition of cardiac disease is what, Ken? The cath, heart cath. So I said the gold standard for us is going to be the golden rule, and that is you care for people the way you want to be cared for. And it also was always my experience that if you had something that you were really proposing, if there was a tangible component to it, it made it a lot more effective. effective. So I adopted that our gold standard, or the gold standard for primary care, for family medicine, is going to be the golden rule. And so I started something that began back in those years, that the gold standard for us was going to be the 1 ounce gold piece. And so every physician that ever joined the group usually was part of the Christmas program, that we'd have them come up and introduce their family and learn more about them, and then give them the 1 ounce gold double eagle as an indicator. This is what we do. And so we've done that for all those years, and it's grown to, when I left at the end of 2022, there was 31 or 2 physicians, and I think with some of us retiring and adding 5 new ones there, in the 32, 33 range. I don't know how much time I have. It's okay. But the gold standard, and using that, yeah, you have to come up here and with me, Aya. Now, usually we pass these around in the old days to do what? Offering. So it's time for that. Only this is going to be the reverse. What I put in here is some $1 coins, the gold-colored ones. And I want you each to take one of these just to remember the anchor point. And I always carry a couple of these in my pocket. And is not... The gold standard is what? It's Jesus. I still remember pass it around and take one if you want. If we run out, Aya has, you have more, don't you? Yes, she does. So, but take one. And if you have somebody particular you want to give it to, the gold standard for us is, I still remember Roland Reimer's, and this tied very much into the whole strategy of the gold standard. When in Matthew 22, 34 to 40, Jesus was queried about the most important law, and it was love the Lord your God with all of. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. Tied in perfectly with this. And in that first presentation in Matthew, Jesus concludes it by saying, all the law and the prophets hang on these 2 commandments, loving God, loving people. And then later on in Luke, when he goes through that same thing, at the conclusion, Jesus says, the Pharisee recited it back to him, and Jesus said, you are close to the kingdom of heaven. Well, what was he missing? The perfect sacrifice. So for us, the gold standard is we have the perfect sacrifice in our Lord Jesus Christ. And so it brings the whole thing together when you do that. And for example, there are so many passages that support it in the Scriptures. The love chapter, 1 Corinthians 13, the last verse, 13, states, now, faith, hope, love. These 3 remain, but the greatest of these is love. So for me, the whole thing fell together. And the epitome of love is God sending His Son, part of Himself, for the perfect sacrifice that the first group of Pharisees in Matthew, okay, the law and the prophets take care of all their laws hang on this, but it still is missing something, as indicated in Luke. And Jesus said, you're close, but you still need the perfect sacrifice to take care of the sins that you have according to the law and the prophets. So the whole love theme just has been at the core of my medical practice and the recruitment of all the physicians. There are no bones about it, that this is what we do. It's the golden rule. So concluded that at the end of 22. So if we don't, oh yeah, you have some more, don't you? You do, don't you? She has everything. This woman, whatever you need, just ask her. So if you run out of those, I think there are a few more in there. But I think those, and the other one are a little better. Aya. You can. By the way, you know, when you talk about good sermons in the past that just ring a sensitivity for you, I have to say something out of current senior pastor, and Brent. It's still one of the best, and this particular passage has been so meaningful to me personally, is the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5 through 7, begins with the Beatitudes, and that sermon series, Brent, is still one of your all-time record best. You've had a lot of good sermons and have provided great leadership, but that one was really meaningful to me. So we've been very fortunate with God has really watched over me particularly carefully. And of course, I'm a recipient of the gift of his son. And so that is a bit of the trek. And there are lots of little nuances here and there that it would be kind of fun to share with you, like Flick, our stint at Elyria grade school in 1950. Mine was 59. I graduated in 60 from high school. So it's, I just thank God for his son. I thank God for this church, for the leadership that has always been so instrumental in helping me understand what the gold standard for us all is. So keep it as a memento just to remind you. And if you, like I said, if you need any more, to Aya, she'll figure out a way to get them. Come on up, Aya.
Thank you, Dr. Bill. What an incredible story, what a legacy. And right now I would like to invite the pastor.
Don't do that. The only reason I came up here is because they said they wanted to record it and I should stand up here. Okay, Brent. I mean, I've got some things on you, big boy. Your career in junior high was marked with some experiences.
Well, I tell people I grew up before they had initials like ADD. I was just an active child, you know. But
True.
I am so grateful for the legacy of this church. I've been connected with this church since my dad was pastor here, starting in 1966. And then, of course, we had a stint away, and I came back. I have such nice memories of Dr. Bill and Joyce here in Wichita growing up. And then you were always such a gracious host when we'd come back on furlough from Indonesia. And Joan and I, it's crazy what you remember, right? And what you forget.
Yeah.
And sometimes I wish I would forget some of the things I remember. And I wish I'd remember some of the things I forgot. But I still remember how moved Joan and I were that you came to our wedding when we got married in '85, and all of a sudden you're there. And so I really appreciated you. You've been a mentor to me. So every once in a while, Dr. Bill calls me and says, Brent, we got to talk. And I think, uh-oh. I think, actually, I can't wait for that. And so I've always appreciated your mentoring of me, and so.
I have to, I guess this is on. I have to tell you one thing that we did back in 2018. What was that? Okay. When I was little, in Germany, I got pretty sick, and they didn't think I would make it. So I was baptized, infant baptism, in case I died. All right, when we got to Eden, and Peter Dick got a hold of us, he confronted me and said, it's time for you to make an active decision. And so we had catechism class when we were ninth graders, and so I was sprinkle baptized in ninth grade at Eden. I just had this sense that I wanted to be baptized. So in March of 2018.
I remember that.
Yeah. And I remember going to you and saying, Brent, I want you to baptize me.
And what I say? You're kind of old.
Your actual comment was, don't you care what people think? And I said, absolutely, I care what
That's
people think.
awesome.
Yeah. And so at any rate, you got to baptize me.
It was a privilege. It was a privilege. So we love you, Dr. Bill, and I'm thankful for your influence into my life. I thought of these two verses related to your story. It's from Psalm 77. And imagine Dr. Bill saying this instead of the psalmist speaking to God. I will remember the deeds of the Lord. That's what you've done here for the past 30, 40 minutes. You have remembered the deeds of the Lord. Remember your wonders of old. I will ponder your work and meditate on your mighty deeds. And it is just so important that when we review our life, that we remember how the Lord guided us. And so thank you for modeling that for us. We love you. Let me pray for you, all right? And then I think we got something after this. Oh, we got some Q&A.
Okay.
Okay. Father, I just want to thank you for my friend Dr. Bill and Joyce and for their impact into my life and for being my mentor. Thank you for his story. It's inspiring. And we are grateful for the mighty deeds of the Lord. So we give you thanks in all things. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Okay, we got Q&A, I think.
I'm sure we have questions. So please raise your hand. And
Bill, I'm just looking at this map. How did you get from Odessa to
Walked.
where you went in Germany? I mean, what transportation?
Walked.
Oh.
They did a lot of it walking. They'd catch a train whenever they could. There are things I didn't mention in there, but because I lived with my grandma and grandpa, they basically walked that distance and took whatever charitable transportation they could get and got to 1,500 miles, which is roughly 2/3 of the way across the United States. Yeah.
anyone else?
And we don't really know. In fact, in the immigration papers, it says I was born in Gronau, Russia. Well, all the others, and because I was living with my grandfather and grandmother, they were all Huberts. And Hebert is the way the immigration officer put it. At any rate, they were all born in Russia, and so then where was he born? Well, he was born in Gronau, and so he automatically put Russia. But the only Gronau I could ever find was in northern Germany, in the Hamburg area, and so I'm sure they went the whole way because it wasn't any reason for them to stop anywhere. And so they set their sights on getting to Germany, and they did. And so my name was Loewen, all the others were Hubert. Now, we could go a long time on details, but before Louise got a hold of me, in German, my name was Willie Loewen. And in Mac, it's still Willie Loewen. But when you say Willie in German, it sounds like Willi. Okay, so they told the immigration officer, what's his name? And they said, Willie. Well, what did he do with that name? Velie. So I was Willie Loewen. Until Louise got a hold of it, and she said, that's not right. And so she went down to the courthouse in McPherson and changed it to William Cornelius Loewen.
Can you give us just a quick little history of your children and grandchildren?
What is what?
History of your children and grandchildren.
I have 3 girls, and they married through three really good young men. I'm so glad I had girls. I know I would have killed boys when they were junior high, but the girls, okay. It was my theory that them going into high school, in the high school years, one of us is going to keep the other off balance. Better it'd be me keeping them off balance than them doing it to me. And so that was my methodology. But they always knew where Dad was, but the idea was to keep them a little off balance on what was coming. Yeah, and we have 7 grandkids. 2 of them are now married. So there's 17 of us when we get together. And every one of them has a solid faith system, and that's an incredible blessing. Yeah.
Well, I have a question. Do you have a favorite grandchild?
Oh, yeah. They all claim to be it, and I'm good with that. As long as they believe it, that's good enough for me. Well, Willie, the oldest grandson, he started medical school and finishing his first year now. And Connor, I don't know if you know Connor Owen. I think a lot of you do. He's in his medical school class too, so the both of them are at KU in med school.
Well, thank you so much again for sharing your incredible story.
And seriously, if you need another gold coin, I can get it for you. I don't know if did we have enough of them?
Yes, we have. Yes.
Yeah, just because I don't know a lot about the details of your life, I'm going to ask, did you have any association with Tabor, you or your wife?
Did I have any, what?
What is the association with Tabor College?
Oh, Joyce, period. I thought, I went to Mac College, I lived at home. I had enough of scholarship to take care of tuition, but staying at home, I made it through school, didn't have to borrow any money. Yeah, medical school. I mean, we could go on a long time in this. Tuition for medical school is now, for a non-stater or something at KU, is like $70,000. $38,000 a year for an in-state tuition. For us, what was it in 1967? $500. Yeah. And when we reached third year, they were going to raise the tuition to $750 a year. And some of my classmates made such a ruckus that they grandfathered us through the whole 4 years, $500 a year. Yeah. But it's purely, to your question, it was purely Joyce. And as I got to know the Tabor people, I thought, good night, this is the best kept secret in society. And there was such an incredible group of people. We got to know most of the presidents, Larry Nickel and so on, Jules Glanzer, and now Jansen, who seems to be doing an amazing job over there. But so yeah, I had the good fortune to get to know them, and I thought, wow, this is the best kept secret around. Chris, our oldest daughter, went there. Kim, the youngest daughter, went there. A couple of the grandkids, 3 of them went there.
All right, well, I would like to invite everyone for a cup of coffee and piece of pie back in Activity Center. So everyone is welcome. Please join us.
Okay, I was not going to do this until you said that. I'm good for pie, and I figure that's the whole purpose of the morning.
Yes. Pie is Dr. Bill's favorite dessert.
Did we have enough coins?
Yes, I do. I have enough coins if someone needs an extra coin.
Yeah, ask Aya. If you need more than that, if it can help us witness for the Lord, He's the gold standard. Yep, you're welcome.